Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome. So today we're tackling something pretty much everyone can relate to persuasion.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
It really is. And we're going to try and break down how it works, how it's evolving, and, well, honestly, how to become a master persuader yourself.
Sounds ambitious.
Well, luckily, we've got an incredible guide.
Oh, and what's that?
Rosa Fischetti's book, Decoding the Art of Persuasion.
Excellent choice.
I know, right? This book is full of insights. I mean, it examines the whole history of rhetoric
Hmm.
and then, like, how it all plays out in this crazy digital age we live in.
Yeah, because, like, even AI is getting involved now, right?
Uh,
Using data to make those persuasive messages even more potent.
Seriously, it's kind of wild when you think about it.
It really is.
It makes you realize just how much persuasion we encounter every single day. I mean, think about it.
Oh, I
Ads,
don't want some.
news articles, even just chatting with friends.
It's everywhere, yeah.
Someone's always trying to convince you of something.
Exactly.
So today, we're going to try to give you the tools to decode those messages.
I like it.
So you can make decisions based on, actual reasoning and not just like clever manipulation.
Crucial skill in today's world.
Absolutely. But before we get too ahead of ourselves,
Yeah.
let's back up a bit.
Okay.
What exactly is argumentation?
Yeah.
And why should we even care about it?
Right. Is it just about, like, winning a debate or something?
We're just like always needing to be right.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, not exactly. Think of it more as presenting evidence
Okay.
to support your ideas, to persuade others to see your point of view.
To come around to your way of thinking.
Exactly. And it's honestly how we navigate different opinions and beliefs.
That's how we debate and discuss things.
Yeah. And even like how societal norms are formed.
It all comes back to argumentation in a way.
It really does. So it's more than just, cold, hard logic.
Oh, definitely. Fischetti really stresses that. Argumentation is much more nuanced. It's a blend of logic, but also emotions, personal values, cultural context it all plays in.
Wow. So it's like this intricate dance between reason and emotion,
You could say that, yeah.
and where understanding your audience is key.
Absolutely. Knowing who you're talking to changes everything.
For sure. One of the things that really stood out to me in the book
Mm-hmm.
was how our approach to argumentation has actually shifted over time. Like, for centuries, it was all about this thing called apodictic discourse.
Ah, yes. Basically, presenting these absolute truths based on pure logic.
Exactly. No room for debate, really. But today, it seems like it's less about proclaiming those, like, hard and fast truths and more about persuading others to see things your way, even if it's, like, a matter of perspective.
It is a shift, isn't it?
It is.
And yeah, I'd say persuasive communication is definitely more prominent now. Like you said, it's less about proving something beyond a shadow of a doubt and more about building a case that resonates with a particular audience.
Okay, so how do the players involved actually, like, influence the game?
Good question. Well, you've always got the sender, the person making the argument.
Okay.
Then you have the recipient, the person or group you're trying to persuade. And lastly, you have the audience, kind of like everyone else who might be listening or reading.
It's like a performance almost.
It can be, yeah.
Hmm.
And the dynamics between these players really shape how an argument unfolds.
That makes total sense. You wouldn't try to persuade, like, your boss in the same way you'd persuade your friend to watch a movie you like, right?
Exactly. You tailor your approach.
Yeah.
And the book also talks about the difference between written and oral argumentation, which I thought was really interesting.
Ooh, tell me more about that. How are those two different?
Well, with written arguments, everything has to be spelled out clearly. You need, precise language, strong logical connectors to guide the reader.
It's all right there on the page.
Yeah. But in oral argumentation, you can use your tone of voice, gestures, you can adapt in real time based on how the other person is reacting.
It's almost like you have this whole extra toolbox of techniques when you're speaking.
You do. Think about reading an opinion piece versus, like, going to a rally.
Completely different vibes.
Right. Both are trying to persuade, but they use totally different strategies.
Okay, so now I'm curious about the, like, anatomy of an argument itself. How can we break it down to really understand how it all works?
Well, Fischetti introduces this really helpful framework called Tolman's model of argumentation. It helps us see those building blocks of any persuasive argument.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What are those building blocks?
So the core of it is three elements: the claim, the data, and the warrant.
Okay, so the claim is basically like your main point, right? What you're ultimately trying to convince someone of.
Exactly. It's the statement you're setting out to prove.
And then the data is the evidence you use to back that claim up.
Precisely. It could be facts, statistics, examples, any information that supports your point.
Got it. But what about the warrant? That one sounds a bit more, like, abstract.
It can be, yeah. The warrant is like the underlying principle connecting your data to your claim. It's the unspoken assumption that makes the argument logically sound.
I think I need an example to really get that.
Sure, let's say you're arguing that we need to invest more in renewable energy.
Okay.
Your claim might be, switching to renewable energy will help fight climate change. Your data could be statistics on rising global temperatures, the impact of fossil fuels, things like that.
Okay, makes sense. So where does the warrant come in?
Well, the warrant is the unspoken assumption connecting those two things. It's the generally accepted idea that reducing our reliance on fossil fuels is good for the environment.
Ah, I see. It's like the underlying principle that makes the whole argument work.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that Fischetti points out that the order you present these elements can actually change how persuasive your argument is. Sometimes leading with the data can be more effective. Other times, a bold claim grabs attention better.
It's like you're strategically arranging those building blocks.
Exactly. You're constructing the most persuasive structure. Now, Tolman's model isn't the only way to think about argumentation. The book also talks about the new rhetoric approach.
Oh, right. Developed by, was it Perelman and Albrecht-Saitika?
That's them. Their approach really emphasizes understanding your audience. They argue that what matters most is how your argument lands with the specific people you're trying to persuade.
So it's not just about presenting this, like, perfectly logical case in a vacuum.
Right. It's about connecting with people where they are, taking into account their values, beliefs, even their emotional state at that moment.
So how does all this apply to, like, me just trying to navigate all those persuasive messages out there every day?
Well, that brings us to your role in all of this. You're the decoder. You need to break down those arguments, see if they hold up, and be able to tell the difference between genuine persuasion and straight-up manipulation.
So it sounds like critical thinking is key here.
Totally. And a really helpful concept Fischetti talks about is the principle of charity.
Okay, what's that?
It basically means giving the person making the argument the benefit of the doubt, trying to see the argument from their perspective, even if you don't agree.
So instead of just dismissing someone I disagree with, try to understand their reasoning first.
Exactly. It helps you stay open-minded and avoid jumping to conclusions, which is easy to do when there's so much information coming at us all the time.
Right. And you can evaluate an argument on multiple levels, right? Like, not just if the logic makes sense, but also if the evidence actually holds up.
Absolutely. And you have to consider the role of emotions and stylistic devices, too. Like, think about how a powerful speech or a really clever metaphor can sway people, even if the logic isn't perfect.
Oh, yeah, for sure. A well-crafted message can be super persuasive, even if it's not, like, totally airtight logically.
And speaking of logic, we have to talk about fallacies. Those errors in reasoning that can totally trip us up.
Ooh, yeah, those are like argumentative landmines. What are some of the ones we should be looking out for?
Well, a classic one is the ad hominem attack, where someone attacks the person making the argument instead of the argument itself.
It's like, I don't like you, therefore your argument is wrong.
Exactly. It's a distraction tactic. And then there's the straw man fallacy.
Ah, where they misrepresent their opponent's argument to make it easier to attack. Classic debate tactic.
It is. Then there's the false dichotomy, where someone presents only two options when there might be many more. Or the bandwagon effect, arguing something is true just because lots of people believe it.
Like everyone's doing it, so it must be right.
Right, just because something's popular doesn't make it true. But learning to spot these fallacies can be really powerful. It's like having this new awareness of how arguments can be manipulated.
It's like a superpower. So we've covered the definition of argumentation, how to analyze its structure, and even uncovered some of those tricky fallacies. But I'm curious about how technology, especially AI, is impacting all of this. That feels like a whole other layer.
It is, and that's exactly where we're headed next. Get ready to explore how AI is changing the whole game of persuasion.
All right, so we've talked about the, like, nuts and bolts of argumentation. But now I'm really curious about this whole AI thing. How is technology like artificial intelligence changing the persuasion game?
That's where things get really interesting. You know, Fischetti really digs into how AI can process like mountains of data, right? And create these hyper-personalized messages that are changing how we see persuasion altogether.
Yeah, and I can see how that's already happening with things like targeted ads online.
Oh, absolutely.
But are there other examples of, AI-driven persuasion that we might encounter?
Oh, tons. Think about like health apps that give you those little nudges to exercise or eat healthier, or educational platforms that tailor the content to your learning style.
Hmm.
AI is all over the place trying to influence us, even in subtle ways.
It's like not just about selling us products anymore.
Yeah.
It's about like actually shaping our actions and habits.
Exactly. And it can be used for, positive things. Think about AI encouraging people to vote or donate to charities.
It's true.
But as Fischetti points out, this power comes with, some big ethical questions.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It's exciting, but also kind of like unnerving, right?
It is.
So how do we make sure AI is being used ethically when it comes to persuasion?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
The book talks about how important transparency and accountability are in how AI is designed, how it's used for persuasion. We need to be able to understand how these AI systems work.
Right, so that we're not being taken advantage of.
Exactly.
Like if we don't know how the AI is making its decisions, how can we be sure it's doing what's best for us?
Exactly. And then there's the whole issue of bias, right? If an AI system is trained on data that's biased, it could perpetuate harmful stereotypes.
Right, right. So
Yeah.
it's like, how can we make sure that AI is being fair when it crafts these persuasive messages?
It's a valid concern. And then there's the privacy issue.
Oh, yeah.
How much of our data should AI be able to use?
Yeah, that is a tough one. I mean, yeah, on one hand, those personalized messages can be effective,
Sure.
but knowing AI has all that info about us, it's a little creepy.
Well, Fischetti argues we need to find a balance, right? We should have control over our data and be informed about how it's being used.
It's like we need a whole new set of rules for how AI can be used in persuasion.
That's a good way to put it. It's a conversation we need to be having right now.
Absolutely.
So, thinking about all of this, how do we become, more savvy about these persuasive messages, especially with AI in the mix?
Yeah, how do we make sure we're not being manipulated without even knowing it?
Well, it starts with awareness, right? Just being conscious of the tactics at play from both humans and these increasingly sophisticated AI systems.
So we need to really sharpen our critical thinking skills.
Yes. Don't just take everything at face value. Question where the info is coming from, look for evidence, and be open to different viewpoints.
It's like we need to become persuasion detectives, always on the lookout.
I like that. And don't be afraid to say no to attempts that don't sit right with you.
Taking back control, making informed choices.
Exactly. Now, the book actually looks at how all this plays out in a specific area. Academic lectures.
Oh, interesting. I don't always think of academic lectures as being persuasive, but I guess in a way they are, right? The professor's trying to convince you of their view.
Precisely. And what the book found was that academics use a lot of specific phrases and cues to guide their listeners through those complex arguments. They act like signposts.
Oh, can you give us some examples of these signposts? That'd be so helpful next time I'm in a lecture.
Think about phrases like, for example, on the other hand, now let's consider, or in conclusion.
Gotcha.
They help make the argument's structure, clearer, easier to follow.
It's like they're giving you a map.
Exactly. It's all about making those complex arguments more accessible.
This has been a really eye-opening deep dive so far. We've gone from the basics of argumentation all the way to how AI is changing the game. I'm excited to wrap it all up and see what we can take away from all this.
Well, let's do just that in our final segment. We'll give you some practical tips for navigating this whole world of persuasion.
Okay, so we've been on quite a journey here,
Yeah.
exploring this whole world of persuasion from ancient rhetoric all the way to how AI is shaking things up.
It's a fascinating landscape.
It is. So what are some of the big takeaways for you? Any aha moments that really stood out?
For me, it's how much persuasion is just everywhere.
It really is.
It's not just ads or speeches.
Right.
It's in almost every interaction we have. Every bit of information we take in.
It's so true. Once you start noticing it, you see those tactics everywhere.
You can't unsee it.
You can't. And it really highlights how important it is to be aware of these tactics.
Oh, absolutely. Otherwise, we're just being pulled this way and that without even realizing it.
Exactly.
And I think one of the most helpful things we talked about was understanding the anatomy of an argument.
Right. Being able to identify the claim, the data, the warrant.
Yes. It gives you that power to see through those weak arguments
Mhm.
or even like manipulative ones.
It's like you get those X-ray glasses for arguments. You can see how it all fits together, or doesn't.
I love that analogy.
Sure.
And then, of course, there are those fallacies. Those are so important to recognize.
Oh, yeah, like the ad hominem attack, the straw man, all those sneaky tactics.
Knowing about those gives you a real advantage. It's like you can deflect those misleading arguments before they even land.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we can't forget about this whole new layer of AI-powered persuasion. Exciting,
Yeah.
but a little daunting too.
It is a lot to wrap your head around.
It is. AI can personalize messages on a whole new level, which has incredible potential. But like we said, we got to be careful about the ethical side of things.
Oh, absolutely. Transparency, accountability, making sure AI is being used fairly, that's all crucial.
It's a big responsibility. We need to demand those ethical standards.
Definitely. So it sounds like, we need to be more aware and critical about all the information coming at us, especially with AI playing a bigger role these days.
100%. Don't just accept everything at face value. Question where the information is coming from. See if the evidence actually supports the claim. Be willing to consider different perspectives.
It's like we talked about before, we have to become those persuasion detectives.
Exactly.
Mm.
Always be on the lookout for those clues.
So it's about taking back control, making informed choices.
Yes, don't be afraid to say no to things that don't align with your values. Be an active participant in the persuasive process, not just a passive recipient.
I love that. So, we've been talking about how to decode other people's arguments, but what about when we're the ones trying to be persuasive?
Oh, that's a great point.
It's easy to focus on being the critical consumer, but we're all trying to persuade others all the time too.
All the time. Whether you're trying to convince your boss to give you that raise or get your friend to try a new restaurant or even just sharing your opinion on social media, we're all engaged in persuasion every day. So how can we be more ethical and effective in our persuasive attempts?
That's a big question. I mean, for me, I think it starts with being honest, not trying to trick or mislead people.
I agree. Build trust and focus on really connecting with people, understanding where they're coming from. Persuasion shouldn't be about winning no matter what.
Yeah.
It should be about creating space for real dialogue and mutual understanding.
So respecting your audience, seeing them as intelligent individuals who can make their own decisions.
Exactly. So there you have it. We've explored this whole art of persuasion, its history, its techniques, and all those ethical implications. I hope you found it insightful. I certainly have.
Me too. It's amazing how something as old as rhetoric is still so relevant today.
It really is. I guess that shows how fundamental this desire to persuade and be persuaded is to, being human.
And understanding how it all works can help us be more aware, more critical, and hopefully more ethical in how we approach it all.
Persuade wisely, everyone.
I love that. So that wraps up another deep dive. Thanks for listening, everyone.